This is the first part of a three-part series about so-called darkroom meditation, a very effective technique for diving into the depths of the mind, and also for experiencing astral projection, a preliminary stage of astral travel. I discovered this method instinctively during meditation for myself, then researched it and found that it is an ancient and well-known technique that has already been practiced by mystics, monks, and initiates of various traditions to experience altered states of consciousness, inner visions, and deep self-knowledge. The more I experimented, and the deeper I researched, the clearer it became how powerful this type of meditation is, and at the same time, how little known it is in the spiritual world, where so much is talked about meditation and consciousness expansion. If you're hearing about this topic for the first time, or don't know the background, then get ready for mind-blowing and eye-opening knowledge, because the secret is: darkroom meditation can bring you to the threshold of astral travel. This is an ancient and efficient technique, documented in various teachings and writings, which we will discuss later. I've already made 2 videos on the topic of meditation, a very beginner-friendly, experimental, and effective technique. This video builds on that to some extent, but you can also watch it without prior knowledge. I'll briefly explain what it's about. Perhaps I should also mention there are prerequisites to experience the meditation as I describe it in the video. The first is also the most important: mental silence. You must learn to permanently silence your thoughts. The other is no less important and concerns the so-called third eye. I will address this in the video, but an open third eye is the prerequisite for experiencing the visual depth of meditation. But both are learnable and trainable, like a muscle you train with exercises. All forms of meditation, consciousness, and mental presence make these muscles stronger. Darkroom meditation might sound weird and creepy at first, sitting in a dark room, but there are a few tricks that make the whole thing more practical for everyday use. For example, there are these sleep masks, with which you can completely darken your field of vision during meditation. And an absolute insider tip from me: you can also combine a hot bath with the meditation and turn off the lights, which has completely different advantages. A bath acts like a sensory pre-discharge, because water does something crucial: muscle tone decreases, body boundaries become more diffuse, and the nervous system shifts toward parasympathetic. You don't come into the darkness from everyday life, but from a prepared body state. This easily saves 30 to 40% of the usual meditation time. Interesting, right? And very, very important, an urgent warning at this point: practicing this method is at your own responsibility. Darkroom meditation over extended periods will definitely affect your visual perception. Be sure to listen to the explanation about this, and read the video description if you plan to start with it. A large part of the video's content is actually from my book Twin Flame Gnosis. If you want to read the complete instructions, and you're interested in the mystical, historical, and scientific background of the twin flame journey, then check out the links. On my website you'll find more information and sample chapters. But now enjoy watching. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and I would also be very happy about subscriptions. See you later.
At some point I experimented further, instinctively and without prior knowledge. I came up with the idea of turning off the light during meditation, as I usually meditated only in the late evening, and thereby I discovered something fascinating that later turned out to be a known and advanced technique of meditation, and through which my perception changed and intensified even further. Because in absolute darkness you can experience a completely different kind of perception and conscious sensing of the world and body. There are no visible objects, no visible boundaries, not even one's own body is visible. Only mind and consciousness in the darkness. So I sat or lay with open eyes in the dark and observed, as usual, what was happening before my eyes. And I was surprised that even in the darkness the colors and moving structures showed themselves, as with closed eyes. Not as intense and clear, but they clearly floated in my extended field of vision. And I could influence them equally with my thoughts and dive into them in a similarly playful way. One aspect that was initially not unusual for me, since I had not known it any differently from the beginning of meditation and had not paid attention to it in previous life. The darkness was never fundamentally dark for me, not even remotely. I had always perceived it as very colorful. I tried to find a comparison to describe my perception. The patterns and structures look similar in coloring and color intensity to images of neural scans, layers of colors: blue, red, yellow, green, less frequently, sometimes more, sometimes less in motion, rather subtle than intrusive, but as a certain basic structure of darkness. When I later researched, I found out by the way that people do not all perceive darkness the same fundamentally. Some see it quite colorfully like me, others perceive it as real blackness and total darkness, without color visual activities. We will come to the reasons shortly. I will first continue describing my experience, mental focusing, with simultaneous absolute and stable silence of thoughts. What you direct your consciousness, the attention to, also influences here the emergence of effects and inner images, the projection of the mind onto the surrounding shadows. I found it fascinating how the inner images are not only seen in the head, but also outside the physical body. Thoughts do not remain in the head. They also visualize themselves externally, a very transcendent experience. Often they are after images of thoughts floating in the darkness, or appearing somewhat delayed. Influencing and visualizing these images works as with closed eyes, but a bit more concentration and focus is needed to hold the images longer, or make them clearer. The patterns and structures in the air in the dark. The darkness is at every point full of potential and possibilities. Everything can arise when attention is directed to it, arbitrarily through pure observation without intention, or through conscious creation and shaping, through feelings, thoughts, or thought impulses. Mechanisms and laws of being, in the large as in the small, above as below, within as without. The mind creates from the darkness using light. In the darkness you experience the heavy body only as an appendage, as a vessel. The mind, the soul, the consciousness, light and free, extends far beyond the physical boundaries of the body. The mind is larger and more than the body. You can try to dive deeper into the darkness with pure consciousness, to let yourself fall, to reach points or places outside the body, to feel there without thinking and seeing, to mix or merge consciousness with the colors and forms. I meanwhile prefer to use the word being without the conscious from consciousness, because it expresses a form of active physical perception, compared to the core, the spark, the pure being that simply is, without properties but full of potential, eternal, and endless. Another interesting observation I made, the high-frequency sound that I mentioned in the first part of the chapter. You can also experiment with this fine hum during darkroom meditation. And I made the discovery for myself that if you manage through concentration to synchronize the sound with the images, then the color patterns, and especially effects, get a completely new quality and also color intensity. When I do everything right, then real color explosions arise before my open eyes in the darkness, the colors brighter and neon-like. Colorful objects form before me and then drift relatively quickly into the darkness, rotating, morphing, changing shape and colors. As long as I can hold the purely observing, focused state, whole series of these objects arise rhythmically, which shortly after their formation fly away into the darkness, usually shrinking, creating an almost three-dimensional depth effect in the dynamics. However, I do not find it so easy to hold this state for long, since at some point concentration wanes, and I am then no longer synchronous with the frequency, the tone. Sound creates light, a quote that I encountered fittingly, and an immensely deep spiritual truth from the oldest transmitted scriptures. It says the universe, physical being, arose through a tone, a vibration. Interesting perhaps also in connection with the neo-Gnostic perspective. Worth knowing, there are chants and tones, so-called bija mantras, or tonal vibrations, that have been used for millennia in various spiritual traditions as sacred tools for consciousness expansion. Through conscious humming or vibrating of certain frequencies, especially in the area between the inner ear and the pineal gland, the energy flow in the body can be harmonized and intensified, whereby inner perception opens even further. Such vibration techniques are basically ancient methods to activate the inner light. Vibration creates form, tone births light, and from this creation of sound and consciousness finally arises the bridge between mind and matter. I want to mention again that I am initially only describing my instinctive experience with this type of meditation. What is generally understood by darkroom meditation? What techniques, backgrounds, and explanations exist? I will address this shortly. Actually, everything that works with closed eyes, as described in the first part, also works in the dark with open eyes. Only a bit more concentration and focus is required. Darkness can facilitate or intensify many of the experiences you want to have during meditation, or spiritually in general, make them more understandable and tangible. So also in the darkness, try out, play around, experiment with perception and fantasy to penetrate the dark exterior. One of the interesting things about this experience is that the colors become more intense after a while, different from what you would actually expect. The intense effects only occur after a few minutes, as is also the case with meditation with closed eyes, when you have dived deeper into your own mind and it has been at rest for a while. Compared to meditation with closed eyes, I find it very impressive and intense how the inner images appear not only in the field of vision of the physical position of the eyes, but extend 360 degrees into the dark space or appear at various points. It is also remarkable. When I am finished with meditation, I have a slight physical pressure sensation in the face in the area of the field of vision, as if I were wearing glasses. Overall, it then feels like the landing after a drug trip, a gentle coming down and getting used to visible reality again. Even minutes afterward, I still see slight effects with open eyes in the light, shadowy patterns and images in the air, behind bright background. Visualizing also works until the eyes adjust to the new light conditions. As already mentioned, my experience of meditation is very visual and colorful, which is why I find the comparison with a hallucinogenic drug trip very apt. The effects of psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, and similar substances, with absolute relaxation, clarity, and control, whereby the speed and quality of these mental manifestations is generally much more direct, more immediate, faster, and also more chaotic. The images and structures emerging from the mind can surprisingly pick up pace and speed. For this, they are of course clearly more fleeting and transient than the hallucinations triggered by the name drugs, which constantly really and largely uncontrollably influence perception. So in this respect, meditation is overall a possibility to experience states of consciousness and hypnotic visual effects without taking substances that can trigger these. A gentle and controlled trip without noteworthy risks. Before I researched, I made my own thoughts about why I experience meditation visually so intensely. Perhaps it is because I find it easy to keep the mind calm, so I get into the deeper levels quite quickly and reliably, where I can fully engage with the visual effects. Perhaps it is also because through my passion for writing and my great imagination, I have always been able to imagine and visualize well, without knowing for long what I was actually unconsciously doing. Especially in younger years, for example, when listening to music or before falling asleep, I imagined self-invented stories like a film playing in the dream cinema of my head. I suspected another possibility, the third eye and the pineal gland, connected with the release of DMT. Perhaps through my development and transformation of recent months, my third eye had opened wide and made me receptive to this expanded visual perception. This type of meditation also permanently influenced my visual perception in everyday life and daylight. In addition to the no-mind view already discussed in the book, the thoughtless seeing where the world looks visually sharper and more detailed, my eyes also became increasingly light-sensitive, or rather residual light amplifying. I perceived all kinds of lights incredibly intensely. Headlights of cars, lamps, especially some street lamps fascinated me, looking fascinatingly surreal, almost painted, with a large radiant aura, light wreaths that radiated further than they actually should. When I lit the candles on a newly purchased candelabra one day, I was so fascinated by the light play that I almost hypnotized myself. I knew this kind of visual perception of light already from mushroom trips that were many years back. I was all the more impressed by the visually partly spectacular and unreal effect, whereby it was in no way unpleasant or even frightening. Quite the contrary. The world outside became a small wonderland. The onset of darkness made the world even more magical than it had already become. Practically the appropriate mystical lighting for my experience. As already described in the first chapter in my personal story, other subtleties and peculiarities of visual perception also set in, such as from thoughtless-looking, briefly slow motion like impressions of scenes, movements, similar to the bullet time known from the film Matrix. Regardless of what scientific explanations there are for this, and we will address this again shortly, and there will always be some, or people will argue with them, driven by a partly fundamental skepticism towards such phenomena, but also because there are mechanisms working in the background that alone, or in interaction with the mind, are responsible for them. Not only in the area of meditation, however, darkroom meditation and the states of consciousness, reachable through transformation of the mind, are a fascinating, transcendent and psychedelic experience on the spiritual journey.